you think that you're not creative? Well, if that's you, you're probably asking the wrong questions. And in this episode, I'm going to share with you 7 proven questions that I use with executives around the world to tap into their creative genius. And that means no need for a paint splattered hoodie or to have mismatching colored socks or anything like that. It's just about taking a poke at the right questions. In a world where AI can do pretty much everything from write your emails to create a strategy deck for you, one thing is really missing, and that is your ability to be creative. And creativity is no longer optional, it's what your edge can be. And I think that most leaders don't lack intelligence. What they simply lack is better questions. So let's get stuck into it with question number 1. Now, my first question is one of my favorites, and it's a bit agitative. And the question is, what if you had to eliminate a core component of your idea or your existing process or technology, whatever it might be, and still make it work somehow? So I'm going to rephrase that once more. So if you had a gadget of some sort and you said, what if we had to remove this? If we had to get rid of it, how would we make it work? Or if we had a process and one of the core components was talking face to face with a customer, what if we had to get rid of that core component? How would we make it work? And what I love about this question, and I think what our clients love about it, is at first it's a bit threatening. It's a bit, you can't do that, it's impossible. And yet at the same time, what it forces you to do is to look into the realm of, well, if we had to, this is what we would do. If we couldn't use this component, we could maybe find something else to do. Or maybe we would just eliminate that whole part of the process. It stretches the mind to come up with good ideas. So the next time you're in a meeting or you've got a project or you're looking at an idea, ask yourself or your team that question. What if we had to eliminate that core component, and how would we still make it work? Question number 2 that can really help to untap your creative intelligence is about imagining you've got a superhero. Now, it doesn't have to be Wonder Woman or Superman, whatever it is, but I want you to think of your creative superhero. And all we need to do is ask, what would, and then you insert whoever that creative hero for you might be, do in this situation? I have about 5 go-to people. I often say, what would Oprah do in this situation? Sometimes I go, what would Elon Musk do in this situation? Sometimes from a marketing perspective, I might think, what would Richard Branson do in this situation? And whoever your creative hero might be, shifting yourself into the shoes of what you think their mindset might be and their approach based on everything you know about them often enables you to get a better perspective. And I think it might have been Einstein who famously said, I'm probably going to bastardize this quote, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, or trying to solve a problem at the same level it was created. And one of the techniques in creative thinking that we talk about is the level of abduction. And I think it was Gregory Bates, an organizational psychologist or sociologist, who came up with this concept of chunking things up. And when we chunk things up from the detailed up to a higher level of abstraction or abduction, that's when we can see a problem from a different way. And when we sometimes start to shift our thinking by thinking of, what would Nelson Mandela do in this situation? Or, what would Madame Curie do in this situation? It helps you to come up with a different perspective and different ideas. Give it a go. It's a little bit of a shape-shifting technique, but it does work. All right, question number 3. I like this one. This is going to give you permission to swing big if you're into golf metaphors or baseball metaphors. And the question is, if failure was 100% acceptable, what would you try? Pretty simple, isn't it? But when we think of things from that way, if we take away the risk out of the equation, you are more than willing, and your team would be more than willing to come up with all kinds of wacky great ideas, which is good. You can always pare them back, but unless you give yourself or other people permission to really go outside of the box, chances are you'll stay just like everyone else, confined and constrained with no game-changing or groundbreaking ideas. If mistakes were 100% acceptable, what would you do? Have a go with that one. Have a giant swing and see what happens. All right, question number 4. I'm going to get a little bit astral on you on this one. No, not really astral. I'm going to get very magical too. And that is, if you had a magic wand and 0 budget constraints, what would you create? So this is trying to give your imagination free rein, not too dissimilar to if you had 100% acceptable to make mistakes, what would you do? But here, if you had a magic wand and you had unlimited budget constraints, what would you do? Again, you're going to find this frees you from some of the constraints of what you think you can't do, what you must do, what you should do, what everyone else is doing, and it can give you a new opportunity and ideas. You can always come back and pare it down later or make it work, but we need to get out of that limitation to start with. All right, question number 5, and this is one of my favorites. I often use this with my clients, which is, if everyone else is doing X, what if we were to do the exact opposite of what everyone else is doing? And doing the exact opposite can work in a lot of different ways. 1, it can be a point of differentiation. 2, it often gives you an opportunity to look at approaching the problem from a different way, not necessarily from a different personal perspective, but just from a physical perspective, or the way that you're approaching the problem or a situation. And it reminds me of some work I did recently with a marketing team that work in the world of technology, giant software program, not going to mention a name. And one of the challenges that they were doing is they'd lost their mojo. They weren't getting great results, even though their product is very renowned. And part of the challenge was like, can you tell us what you're doing that your competitors aren't doing? And it was like, oh no, we're doing this, we're doing that. I said, yeah, that's exactly what your competitors are doing. What are you doing that they aren't doing? And their marketing material, their marketing ideas, their initiatives, their campaigns were vanilla, just like everyone else's. And I said, well, what if we were to do the complete opposite? If they're just doing digital marketing, what if we just started to do face-to-face events and no digital marketing? How would that change? Oh, that's impossible. But what if we did? What would be the consequences, or how would we make that work? Or if everyone else is doing email marketing, what if we were just doing marketing via telephone, whether it's SMS or text messages or rich content services and the sort like that? Trying to think of the opposite often gives you a better point of standing out and also a fresh perspective when it comes to ideas. All right, question number 6. If you had half of the resources, what would you do to solve this? And for me, half of the resources is kind of like if you were bootstrapping it, if you were just starting out, that type of mindset. And you'd be surprised if you only had X amount. Well, we would do this, we would do that. We would try and partner up with someone. We would look at getting sponsors. We would do X, Y, and Z. It's a nice question, especially when you can then come back and say, don't worry, you've got twice the budget now. But it does, funnily enough, having constraints can help you to generate great ideas. But when you always operate in the constraints, then that can sometimes minimize your ideas. So now it's a bit of a juxtaposition, and yet it does work. So again, what would you do if you had half the resources and you had to make things work? All right, question number 7, my last one, and I found it really works to tap into that inner genius of the people that we work with. And that is, when we're designing something, I'm going to put my user experience hat on right now. I hope it looks all right. And user experience is making sure that the assumptions that a designer of a product or process or a service, whatever it might be that you're trying to sell or create, matches the interpretation of the user. And why this is important is we want to make sure that if someone is using a product, or their expectation of the product is as good, if not the same as what we think it should be used at. And one way to help you get really good ideas is to think of your absolutely best customer, and at the same time, what would your worst customer be thinking? And so if you can think of what would thrill both your best customer and your worst customer at exactly the same time. So essentially what we're trying to do is find the overlap that no one else can see. Because there's a theory in user experience design that if you can cater for both the worst and the best and the worst at exactly the same time, you will be able to cover the rest. And it's at these extremes where we often also have the biggest influences or influence that goes down. Someone who really hates a product, or your worst customer, they're going to tell a lot of people, and someone who loves your product are probably going to tell a lot of people as well. So if we can try and thrill or delight both of those, we are going to come up with a better solution. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, but I'm not a product designer. I get that. But we can still do the same thing with a project. So we might think about who is our worst stakeholder and who is our best stakeholder, and how do we satisfy both of those different people. You get the gist of it, but it really does start to prompt you to think in a different level. So let's start to wrap this up. Everyone out there has native creative abilities. The only problem is we've been conditioned to think a certain way day in, day out. But if we can start to ask questions at the right time in the right space and place, we can not only prompt ourselves or other people to get into that creative genius that we all already have. And it does work. So please try these out and see how you go. Now, if you want to take your creative intelligence, your genius to the next level, why don't you start with working out how creative you might actually be right now? Now, I'm not here to judge people, but we've got developed a very, very powerful creativity quiz that can help to not only identify some of your creative strengths and weaknesses, but what kind of code you might be. And you can do this quiz totally for free. And not only will you work out a lot more about what your creative strengths are, but also some activities you can do to help you take that creative intelligence and genius to the next level. So to find it, head to ideamaverick.com/quiz to take it. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for tuning in, listening in, wherever you might be. Hey, and if you like it, please let us know. Send us a comment what you might want to hear from me in my next episode. See you soon.